Riddle me this. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs at night? The answer? This review, baby! Ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba-ba. Happy Monday, my friends, and welcome to Thumb Together TV. Today we're talking about Westworld together, and last night was a doozy. This is episode 4 of season 2, Riddle of the Sphinx. And let me tell you something straight up. The minute the opening credits told me that it was partially written by Jonathan Nolan and that it was directed by Lisa Joy, I knew we had a special episode on our hands. As if the title wasn't special enough. I mean, Riddle of the Sphinx, that's a badass title. It was even an extended episode. You know, most of these things are 60 minutes long. This one clocked in at 71 minutes. So this is one of those special parts of the show that is too big and too epic for the constraints of syndicated TV scheduling. That's how we roll in Westworld. Massive spoilers ahead, everybody. Spoilers away. So Riddle of the Sphinx, what happened? God, what didn't happen? I guess let's start at the beginning here. If you're like me and you're obsessed with Lost, we got a very, almost too on-the-nose Lost reference at the start of Riddle of the Sphinx. We began the episode with a record playing an old song in an undisclosed location with no windows, featuring a person whose face we couldn't see riding on an exercise bike. It was the opening of Lost Season 2 all over again. We even had, if you noticed, in the ceiling of this room, there was even a very familiar hexagonal shape that Lost fans will instantly recognize. This had homages to Lost all over it, and I was loving that. I mean, how could I not love that? So who is the person inside this not Dharma hatch? Well, that person would be James Delos. The old man who started the company himself. He's in there, he's exercising, he's being weird, he's got these hand tremors still, and we find out some shocking truths going on here. We learn, essentially, the riddle of the Sphinx. We learn the answer to possibly the biggest question that's been posed so far by the series, which is, what is Delos really trying to accomplish in Westworld? As Teresa said in the pilot episode way back in the day, the park is one thing to the guests, it's another thing to us here in the park, and it's something else entirely to management. This episode told us exactly what that something else entirely was, and it's some dark shit, baby. Delos is trying to achieve immortality. How are they trying to do that? By uploading our own personalities into these little spherical devices called control units, and then printing duplicate bodies of us, putting that control unit in it, and presto, you've got a robot clone of yourself. And that's essentially what's happening here to James Delos. A couple episodes ago when we met him for the first time, we saw, he's not a young man, and he's got the hand tremors. He's not long for this world. His interest in the park suddenly became an interest in immortality. Everything we see in this episode of Jim Delos in this hatch, for lack of a better term, it's not the real Jim Delos, because Jim Delos has been dead for quite some time. What we're seeing here are all the iterations of his robot clones, and how the good people at Westworld have been trying for years unsuccessfully to clone him and to keep the clone alive, because they seem to reach a certain point. They've got like a shelf life, and once they hit this shelf life, their brain starts rejecting itself because of just how unnatural it is. It rejects its own reality. It could be hours, it could be weeks, but eventually the clone minds start to malfunction, and you've got yourself a mess on your hands. And what happens when that goes down? Well, William just says, burn it and try again. And so you've got this clone of James Delos in this room being burned alive, and then a couple weeks later, his personality is implanted in another body, and they try again. So it's just this hell over and over and over. It's some dark stuff, man. It boggles the mind. It really starts to draw the boundaries of acceptable science, and I don't think this falls on the right side of acceptable science. Now, back in season 1, Dr. Ford made a mention of Lazarus, the Bible story of Lazarus, wherein a man is resurrected from the dead by Jesus, he mentions the story just in passing, and he says, one day we'll be able to cheat death and rise like Lazarus out of his cave. This is what he was alluding to. This is the cheating of death that the higher-ups are trying to accomplish. And it's so fitting because the entrance to this small hatch, this little facility where this experiment is taking place, is found inside a very old biblical-looking cave in a sector of Westworld where nobody ever goes. The connections are just staggering, man. Speaking of that cave, you know who was chained up in that cave for like a week? Elsie. Elsie's back. She's not dead, but it is confirmed now that it was Bernard who chained her up there. Now Bernard finds her. He's dragged to that cave by Clementine. He walks into the cave and he's like, oh my god, it's Elsie. And she's like, oh my god, stay away from me. Asshole, you dragged me here. And of course he frees her, but then we get the trippiness of the whole Bernard thing. This was definitely the trippiest of all the Westworld episodes so far because Bernard's mind is just effed. He is reliving memories back and forth. We don't know if he's remembering this or if he's remembering other things. It's just insanity, and I can't really explain it properly here. In this Lazarus facility, we'll call it, there is a small laboratory. And when Bernard and Elsie go down to this lab, they see dead bodies everywhere. Humans and drone husks. And it's like, what's happening here? And by the end of the episode, we find out, we get another little Bernard glitch memory thing where he walked down into that lab at some point and he was in a trance. So I'm assuming it was like Ford's programming that was making him do this, or somebody's programming. But he walked down into that lab, he stole a control unit, and then he made the husks kill all the humans and then kill themselves by snapping their own necks. Ever since we saw the husks back in the first episode here, I've been waiting. I've been like, these dudes are going to tear shit up and it's going to be horrifying when that happens. And it happened now, and it was just as horrifying as I thought because they are just these faceless creatures and they will not hesitate. There's no reasoning with them. Bernard ordered them to just murder all these people because they saw him take away that control unit. This, of course, raises a lot of ginormous questions, the first of which being, what was that control unit all about? Why did Bernard steal that particular unit? And of course, that leads right into a second question, which is, who programmed Bernard to steal it? I'm going to assume for now that it was Robert Ford, because Ford had a lot of control over all the things Bernard was doing throughout season 1. But maybe it's something more sinister than that, because Robert Ford's games, his machinations, the way he thinks, I believe that they are strictly involved in the world of the park. Whereas what was going on in that hatch regarding creating clones of Mr. Delos, that seems like something that's above even Ford's pay grade. That seems like something that's purely on a corporate level. I have a feeling that whoever made that programming happen in Bernard was the same person who wants Abernathy for leverage, for insurance, because we still have that plot point to get to. However, I do think Ford is the one who programmed Clementine to take Bernard to the cave because she just drags him there without question. Dolores doesn't tell her to do that because I don't think Dolores knows about that yet. So I have a feeling that that was Ford trying to show Bernard, hey, look at this bad shit that's happening here. And this whole thing in this hatch with Jim Delos, it does loosely tie into the title of Riddle of the Sphinx, which is that crazy riddle I said at the beginning of this episode. It's about the life of a human being from start to finish. You walk on all fours in the morning. When you crawl, when you get older, you walk on 2 feet. And when you're very old, you use a cane, and that's 3 feet. And that's an age-old riddle. It's from Oedipus. And there's also a little season 1 Easter egg in that hatch. If you notice, the record that's playing on the turntable, the sticker in the middle of the record looks like there's a maze shape going on in there, like a circular maze. And season 1 was all about the maze. There's so much in this episode that I don't even know what to segue to next, but I think the next thing that should be touched upon is Emily. Emily is the character played by Katja Herbers. We met her last week. She was running around Rajworld. She got chased by the tiger. She washed up on the shore, and she got caught by the Ghost Nation. Well, now she is fully captured. She's a prisoner in the Ghost Nation. This is me being a prisoner. She was a prisoner in the Ghost Nation camp, and she bumps into Stubbs. Because remember, this is still the present. We haven't jumped to the future in this episode. So Stubbs is still in Ghost Nation captivity. A bunch of other humans are there with them. And the Ghost Nation lines them up, and it looks like it's a firing squad, like some bad shit's gonna go down. But Emily is very resourceful. She somehow manages to cut her bonds and run away into the night. She leaves. As she's talking with Stubbs when they're still in the camp, he makes some kind of comment like, don't worry, I'm going to get us out of here. And she says, I have no intention of leaving. She wants to stay in the park. She can also speak the language of the Ghost Nation fluently. So this is a lady who knows her way around this park in general. She knows her shit. You know, the gears in your head start turning and you start thinking, okay, is this who I think it is? And it turns out, yes, it's exactly who you think it is. This is, in fact, the daughter of William. We heard about her last season. William had a daughter named Emily, who is not very pleased with him at the moment. She thinks he's responsible for his wife's suicide. And Emily has been doing the same kind of thing her father has. She's been spending a lot of time in the park just being hedonistic, and she knows the park fairly well now, and now she has no intention of leaving because she's got her own end game, whatever it may be. And now Emily is just this wild card. We don't know whose side she's on. Chances are it's not going to be William's side, but then again, who knows? The last moment of the episode is actually her riding up to meet William and saying, "Hi, Dad." Because she does have ties to Delos, I have a sneaky feeling that she's not one of the good guys. But who knows? Only time will tell. When Emily runs away from the Ghost Nation camp, Stubbs is left there alone and he's got a knife to his throat. And the Ghost Nation leader walks up to Stubbs and he whispers in his ear and he speaks English. We've never heard the Ghost Nation speak English before, but he speaks perfect English in his ear, which makes me think this is a Robert Ford kind of thing coming through again. And he says to Stubbs, "We only live as long as the last person who remembers us." Which is a beautiful and haunting little piece of wisdom, by the way. That's like the ultimate fortune cookie. You know, you open that up and you see that, and you're like, damn, they're not wrong. To Stubbs, at least at the moment, it doesn't seem like it has any real meaning. But considering that most of this episode revolved around Jim Delos, then yeah, that has a hell of a lot of meaning. Because Delos is stuck in this hatch being cloned over and over again. He wants immortality. That's all he wants, is he wants to live forever and just keep going and be a robot for the rest of his life and take over the world or what have you. But it's not working out. And many years go by. I mean, when William visits him initially, it's young William. It's Mr. McPoyle. He's still young William. And he's like, hey, okay, let's see if you're functioning. Oh, you're not functioning. Okay, let's burn you and try again. And they try again and try again. And so many years go by that eventually it's old William. It's Ed Harris now who walks into the hatch and is like, "Hello, Jim. Let's see if you're working now. God, I'm getting mighty sick of this." And it's still not working. And at that point, when it's old William who visits Mr. Delos, because Delos is always asked about his family, but once it's old William, Delos asks, how's my daughter? How's my son? How's my granddaughter? Whatever. And old William says, "Listen, your daughter's dead. She killed herself. Your wife is dead. She's been dead for many years. Your son overdosed a long, long time ago. There was nothing we could do for him. He was a lost cause. So your whole family, aside from your granddaughter, who doesn't even speak to me anymore, they're all gone." And that really pisses Delos off. That's like the final nail in the coffin. And it really harkens back to what the Ghost Nation chief said. We live only as long as the last person who remembers us. And seeing as how Delos' granddaughter really doesn't know him all that well, as far as we can tell, not very many people are left in the world who remember Jim Delos except for William. Even if those clone bodies do start working and he can start going out and living his life again, nobody remembers Jim Delos anymore. Even though he's walking and talking and breathing, Jim Delos is dead. He's gone. And that's such a twisty little mind fuck there. That's such a riddle of the Sphinx, if you will. It's one of those kinds of big philosophical questions that Westworld always seems to be asking. Is that living? If he was to walk out of that hatch right now and be like, "I'm fine and my clone body is working perfectly," is that living? Because there's nobody around who can look at him and be like, "Wow, you're still here, Dad," or "Granddad." You're like, nobody's around to say that anymore. It really is the truest death a human being can endure. It's very disturbing. I think that's the best word for it. It's a very disturbing thought. Some people are afraid of death, and that's perfectly understandable. But I think this frightens me much more. I mean, if I was to die today, at least I know there are a lot of people who would remember me and who would miss me. But if I was to somehow cloister myself somewhere, and then everybody who ever knew me is dead, then it's like, well, am I really alive anymore? That really makes you think. That's a frightening thought. That alone made this one of my favorite, if not my favorite episodes of Westworld, because it sucker punches you in the gut and in the brain. The question of mortality becomes even more convoluted. It's not just a matter of, I think, therefore I am, anymore. Suddenly it's a lot less black and white than that. And that's amazing. Now, speaking of William, we didn't see him last week, but this week we see a whole lot of William. And he and Lawrence end up back in Lawrence's hometown. But there's trouble afoot because Craddock is there. Craddock and the remaining surviving members of the Confederados who escaped from Dolores' fortress, they all came here. And they're mad as hell. So they start taking the whole village hostage, including William. And as William is sitting there, and he's watching Craddock sadistically torment the people in this village, you can see that it's really hitting home, because in season 1, William was doing the exact same shit to these exact same people. Up to and including dancing with Lawrence's wife. If you remember in season 1, he wanted information from Lawrence, so he did just that. He grabbed Lawrence's wife and he danced with her, and he was holding his revolver to her head. And he's like, "What do you think, Lawrence? You want to tell me what I need to know?" And in this episode, William is sitting at the table as much a hostage as everybody else, and Craddock grabs Lawrence's wife and does the same thing. He dances with her, and he's got a gun to her head. And you can see Ed Harris is playing it so beautifully. He's sitting at that table and he's watching this, and he's like, "Oh my God, I was this monster once. I was doing this to these people. Even though they're not really people, they're robots. I was this kind of jackass to these people." And you can see that gets to William, but he does not want to let that show. He saves the village, but in his own William kind of way. And in a very cool way, which is one of the coolest deaths I have ever seen in anything. Craddock is talking about, "Oh, I'm well acquainted with death. Death and I are good buddies, and I don't care about death, blah, blah, blah." And William is like, "Are you so sure you're acquainted with death, sir? Because you've been sitting across from him this whole time, and you haven't even noticed." And he just smashes this bottle of tequila and jabs it in his neck. And then this gunfight breaks out, and William's not invincible anymore. He can die. But he doesn't die. He's like, "Pa-pow, pa-pow," and he takes out all of these Confederados. And he saves Craddock for last, because Craddock is a big meanie. And he grabs that shot glass that's got nitroglycerin in it, shoves that nitro down Craddock's throat, and he gives a rifle to Lawrence, and he's like, "There you go, Lawrence. There's some target practice." And Lawrence shoots Craddock, and Craddock friggin' blows up like the 4th of July. I've seen some great villain deaths in my time, but that's making the list. That was spectacular. What was so cool about it was that it was more or less another villain who was doing that. That really made the scene interesting for me, because William, like I said, he was this monster in season 1, and now he's fighting those same monsters. Ford reaches out to him again through that little girl and says, "One good deed doesn't change what you did. You have to, if you want to find the door, if you want to keep playing my game, you got to look backwards, not forwards." And William says to Ford / this girl, and he's like, "Who said anything about a good deed? I'm just playing your game, and when I play to the bone." And I'm like, damn, William is hardcore. This is one of the episode's great questions, is what does the little girl mean when she says to look backwards, not forwards? I'm assuming that it means the answers to finding the door lie in William's past. But does that mean his daughter? Does that mean Jim Delos? Does that mean his wife? Because we really don't know anything about his wife. We saw her for like half a second back in episode 2, and that's it. So what does the past have in store that's so important for William? I guess we will find out. This makes me wonder if at some point in the future we'll see William donning a white hat again. Maybe. Elsie says something to Bernard when she first bumps into him that puzzled me, because as far as we know, Elsie has no idea Bernard is a host. So when he rescues her and he's malfunctioning because he's losing cortical fluid, as they call it, and he's all shaking, he's like, and Elsie's like, what's wrong with you? She's so confused. Every sentence she says is, "What the hell is this? What the hell is that? What the hell's going on? Somebody explain to me what's happening." And Bernard shows her his tablet, and she opens it, and there's all his statistics on the tablet. And I'm like, okay, this is the moment where she finds out he's a host. But her reaction is very strange. She looks at it and she's shocked, and she says to Bernard, "You rotated out." That's a very puzzling line of dialogue, because right after that she reacts the way I thought she would. She's like, "But you had a wife, you had a son, you had a backstory. Oh my God, you're a host." She has that revelation, but she starts that off by saying, "You rotated out." What does "you rotated out" mean in this situation? The only thing I can think of is that this lends credence to the theory that the host's central processing units are being swapped into different bodies. That's the only thing I can think of. Is this even something that I should be asking, or is this just a non sequitur? Is this just something Elsie said that really just has no bearing on the story, and I'm just reading too much into it. Now, close to the end of the episode, Bernard and Elsie find the hatch with Jim Delos, and he's still inside. It's all wrecked up, and his face is like mutilated, but he's still in there, and he's crazy, and he's malfunctioning, and he attacks them, and Bernard fights him off and like throws him to the ground. As he's struggling with Bernard, Delos speaks this line of dialogue. I don't know if it's from something. I don't know if he's quoting a passage from something or if this is just something the writers came up with. But it is very haunting and very cool. And I pulled up the exact quote because I liked it so much. And I'm going to try to say it with the same intensity that he did. So here goes. They say there were two fathers, one above, one below. They lied. There was only ever the devil who managed to look up from the bottom. It was just his reflection laughing back down at you. That is one of the creepiest effing things I've ever heard, but it's also one of the coolest. It's such a nihilistic statement too. It's so dark, and it's so fitting for everything that has happened to at least this version of Jim Delos. I gotta say, we've been itching to see Shogun World. I mean, that's been a big deal for season 2, and last week we caught Shogun World in the last few seconds before they cut to black. This week, we had no Shogun World, we had no Maeve, and we had no Dolores. But somehow they still gave us one of the most exciting episodes this series has had to date. A minute into this episode, I was so intrigued that I already had forgotten about Shogun World and Maeve and Dolores, because something new was in front of me that was even more interesting. So that was Westworld Season 2, Episode 4, The Riddle of the Sphinx. And what an episode it was. I'm Andrew Fantasia. Thank you for watching. Of course, if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to give it a thumbs up and give some love to that subscribe button as well. I'll see you here next week to dive into more crazy theories and answer more mysterious questions that this show poses to us. Until then, cowpokes, these violent delights have violent ends. Giddy up.